Good afternoon. My name is Jason Coleman, and I'll be the moderator for this session titled Cautiously Springing Towards Innovation, Critical Assessment of Generative AI Applications in Academic Libraries. Before we begin, I have a few reminders. We have a code of conduct that we will adhere to for this conference. The link is posted in chat in a moment. And if you experience any questions related to conduct, please contact us via email. Please be sure your microphone is muted. During the Q&A, please wait until you are invited to unmute before asking your question or making your comment. You may also use chat for questions, and there'll be a point where questions are asked for by Sierra, I believe. The session is being recorded, and you can enable captions by clicking on the Show Captions button at the bottom of the screen. It is my pleasure to introduce Sierra Schuman, Matt Ogborn, Wes Edens, Marianne Naumann, and Leela Denver. Sierra is the most recent instruction and outreach librarian at Arizona State University Library. Her interests lie in student-centered learning practices, wellness, and serendipitously, AI. Matt is an instruction and outreach librarian at ASU Library who used to work in educational publishing, but now gets to work with students. He is slightly less worried about AI than he used to be. Wes is a liaison librarian in the Social Sciences Division at ASU Library, focusing on business and managing the Ask a Librarian chat service. Marianne is an undergraduate instruction and assessment librarian at ASU Library with an interest in AI and information literacy. And Leela is an instruction and outreach librarian at ASU Library. Some of their passions include service to neurodiverse students, community outreach, and the implications of AI for social equity. So please join me in welcoming Sierra, Matt, Wes, Marianne, and Leela, and I turn it over to them.
All right, hi everybody. My name is Matt, and I'm just going to give you a little context ahead of what my wonderful colleagues are going to be talking about. So we are at Arizona State University. If you don't know this already, Arizona State is humongous. In 2023, we had approximately 80,000 in-person students and 66,000 online students. So that's a lot of students. We have innovation is a really big concept at ASU. Our president, Michael Crow, talks about innovation all the time. And in fact, we have buses that take students between campuses that have huge bus wraps that say #1 in innovation on them. So that's very much a focus at ASU. Sometimes things move too fast, I would in fact say. But we got innovation in our title because that's really the focus here at ASU. And in January 18th of this year, ASU and OpenAI announced a partnership. And this is the first partnership between OpenAI and a university. And then very shortly thereafter, on the 1st of February, ASU announced an AI Innovation Challenge. And it encouraged folks who worked at ASU to come up with some projects that they thought they could use AI for to enhance or improve educational outcomes at ASU. So 175 groups submitted to do this, and 105 were accepted. And 2 of them were from the library. We're going to talk about those today. Just real quickly, what was given to the folks who applied and were awarded these, we got to access ChatGPT Enterprise. And part of the reason we use that at ASU is the work we did within OpenAI did not then get fed back up in to be used as training data. So when we did this, when we started this project, it ran from February 16th to May 10th. ChatGPT 3.5 was the standard, and so by doing this, we got access to ChatGPT 4. So there is now a second round of the challenge running, and I believe that they have ChatGPT 4 Omega. So this is all moving very quickly. So Omni.
For Omni.
Omega, Omni, who knows? Little nonsense. So apologies. So we did 2 projects. The first one, 8 people in the library, and 4 of the folks here were on a project called AI Eval, a project to develop critical assessment frameworks for generative AI. And then the second group, which had 11 people in it, and 3 of the folks here were in that group, it's called Using AI Personas to Train New ASU Library Employees. And so to begin, after me, my colleague Leela is going to talk a little bit about the first project, and then my colleague Wes is going to talk a little bit about that second project, and then our colleague Marianne, who's somehow become the expert on AI in our library, probably through no intent of her own, is going to talk a little bit about some larger issues. And then Sierra is going to ask some questions about the project and outcomes and pluses and minuses. So Leela.
Thanks, Matt. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the evaluation framework project, which I was a part of. There were 8 participants total, or 8 researchers, if you will. And the primary goal of this project was to use ChatGPT and other generative AI services like Perplexity and Copilot to examine common student research topics through the lens of 8 different evaluative criteria. So the 8 criteria that we chose to use were ACT UP, SIFT, CRAAP, the 5 Ws, ESCAPE, CCOW, radar, and robot. So I'm sure many of you have heard of some of these, but these are just really common evaluative methodologies that we use and that we teach in our library instruction sessions. After we completed our research, we did come to the conclusion that none of the existing frameworks were adequate for assessing AI-generated content. So we had to pivot. And we pivoted our focus to developing a set of questions and mindsets that can help students critically assess AI outputs and AI's role in the research process. And we are now looking forward to disseminating what we've learned through by creating resources that support teaching and learning, such as online tutorials and online services like that. A little bit more background about this project and about the methodologies that we used. We were able to collect over 1,000 student research topics, and we collected those topics by looking at in-class worksheets from library instruction sessions that were given during the academic year 2023 and 2024. And then we had 1,000 topics, and that was so many topics. So we used ChatGPT actually to categorize all these topics into 8 distinct categories. And then from there, each of us used each of these research topics, went into each of the different AI platforms that we were analyzing. We plugged in the research topics and we talked to the system and saw what it gave us and analyzed what it gave us. So some of the topics that we covered were questions about what the requirements for college admission should be. The environmental impact of electric vehicles is a big one right now, and whether or not TikTok is beneficial to its users or not. So those are 3 of the major topics that we talked about. And so, like I said, we did come to the conclusion that none of these frameworks are really ideal for assessing AI. So what we did come out with at the end of the project was we developed a set of questions and considerations or mindsets that students can have when they are approaching the evaluation of generative AI and figuring out where it really plugs into their research process. And we provided recommendations, which we contextualized within Kuhlthau's information search process and figured out where AI is appropriate in the research process for stages like brainstorming, keyword identification, background information, or creating an outline for students to have a starting point. Yes, and ASU, as Matt said in the comments, ASU has banned TikTok on ASU computers, so a lot of students are interested in that, but it is kind of a hard topic that we have to figure out how to navigate with the restrictions.
Well, thank you, Leela, for giving a rundown of the evaluation project. Wes, if you would like to talk about the AI personas project.
Sure. And before I start talking about that, I just thought I would mention, there was a very tight time frame. So we were moving, if not rushing, we were moving very quickly. We only had, I think, about 2 weeks to kind of get together and decide on the projects that we wanted to propose. And then the projects needed to launch right away because they were going to wrap up in 90 days. So this was, and we had to turn in a final report at that time. So we had to move quickly. And so we were brainstorming, different ideas. Also, I think there were about 400 projects that were proposed initially in this first round, and just over 100 were selected. So we were like very surprised and pleased that our 2 proposals were among the ones that got, that got selected. And the way my project, I'll say but it was a big team effort, got started was, it's easy to kind of latch on to the idea, especially if you've used chatbots, very much. You think, well, here's this new tool and we do chat, why don't we have this thing answer chat questions? But, when you stop and think about it for a little bit, it's, especially in the level that Gen AI is right now, that's not quite the best, use of it. You can't really just turn your Ask a Librarian service over to, ChatGPT. For one thing, it cannot access your licensed resources, and as we know, there's just a lot of problems with it. But we knew from what's going on in the corporate world, say with Salesforce, the company Salesforce, they are using Gen AI, and they have been using it for some time to simulate customers of various types. So we thought, why don't we use this to simulate patrons of various types? And initially we thought we can also simulate patrons with various backgrounds, various emotional states, things like that. So, we started brainstorming, and first of all, everybody started playing with ChatGPT 4, which nobody had really used very much before. So everybody on the team started, and there was like 11 of us started playing with it. And then we also started looking at, since we narrowed down, at first we thought maybe we can have this train employees on all kinds of tasks, how to check out a book, or, how to, all the tasks that a new library employee might do. But we kind of narrowed it down pretty quickly to let's just do chat. And let's just training for chat specifically. And so the 10 or 11 of us, can't remember how many it was exactly, started playing around with it, getting used to what it could do, learning about custom GPTs. And then we also started looking at our transcripts from chat, thinking that would be fodder for the AI. And we are, because of the enterprise license, there were certain restrictions that came with it. For example, restrictions imposed by ASU, for one thing, that we could not have any, personally identifiable information in there, even though what we were doing was supposed to be protected from the training the larger, language model for the future. And we could not really involve students unless they were student employees, and it could not be public facing. So we had those restrictions in place. So we did start looking at the transcripts. First thing we had to do was start organizing this transcripts. So Matt Ogborn, who's on this presentation with us, and I started doing was rushing through transcripts and tagging them, which we hadn't done before, according to the rough subject and theme of the question that was in the chat transcripts. So that we can have a better idea of actually what people were actually asking us. And then everybody on the team started experimenting with creating custom GPTs that would simulate students. We narrowed down to students, because when we looked at our questions, that's where the vast majority of our questions come from, is grad students and undergrad students, not so much faculty, not so much staff or unaffiliated users. So those things started going. So we were looking at the questions, and we were looking at the capabilities of GPTs, custom GPTs, and everybody started developing their own custom GPTs with different names, which was fun. And they came from different backgrounds. And if you've never created a custom GPT, you can give it preset instructions, so you don't have to do everything through the prompt. And after a while, we narrowed down to 2 GPTs, one called Bluto, named after John Belushi's character in Animal House, who actually came equipped with a predefined set of questions that they would rotate through. These were actual chat questions that we had anonymized and sanitized so they could be used for this project. So that was one. Bluto was another one. Then we had Ask a Librarian Trainer, And that one did not have preset questions. It had some basic instructions on that. It was a student and needed to ask research questions, but it had several different personas that we could cycle it through. And we used a code word collywobbles whenever we wanted it to cycle to a different persona. I would say that we found out that it's very hard to use emotional state, at least with that version of ChatGPT. It didn't really make any difference to the personas. We could say you're in a rush, you're impatient, you're happy. It didn't really affect how the persona interacted with us. So we kind of got back to the basics of, you're a student, this is your program, you ask us some questions. I would say, just briefly to kind of sum it up, we figured out that it is, when and the final phase was, we ran an experiment. We tested it out with people who had not actually been chat operators before. And they found that they did feel more confident on a Likert scale, went from 2.6 to 4.0. They felt more confident after doing some simulations with Bluto and the Ask a Librarian trainer. And people felt that the GPTs were fairly realistic. I think 4.0 on a scale of 1 to 5. But there were drawbacks, which we can talk about later. So I think it's a piece of the pie, not the whole dessert when it comes to training people on chat.
Well, thank you, Wes. And Marianne, do you want to briefly talk about AI and its implications? Your knowledge as the queen of AI in our library.
Yeah, no, I think we'll probably talk about this a little bit, but I mean, we live in a world where a lot of the discourse around AI is usually at the extremes, right? It's like either you've had the Kool-Aid and it's the best thing in the world, or you're afraid the robots are going to take over. And I think coming into these projects, we had people who were, learning and trying to get a better grasp on what's the reality was. And as librarians, we tend to focus more on some of the real world ramifications, that whether it's misinformation, bias, privacy, and things like that. Moreover, when we encounter patrons, and I'm sure you've all encountered patrons, regardless of your role in the library, who come with fabricated citations, or maybe they have overly optimistic or misguided ideas about the capabilities of AI and research. So these actions really underscore the need for us with these projects to deepen our understanding of the technology and become more proficient in it. And I think that these two projects, in fact, were able to help us with that. By designing either custom GPTs or stepping into the shoes of our students to explore AI throughout the research process, we really equipped ourselves with that knowledge and skill necessary to navigate and guide others through the complexities of this technology. So we've kind of laid out the projects a little bit, giving you an overview, kind of contextualize things, and I'll hand it back to Sierra.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Marianne. And speaking back to just experiences and the justifications for why these two projects were done, upon the overall reflection, what are some of the potential promises of AI in library spaces?
I'll go first. I do think there's a role for AI in training. Like I said, at the end of our training project, I was partially successful. So it's kind of bridges the training gap between reading something like documentation or transcripts and then being confronted with an actual patron asking you questions, maybe in a pressured environment. So it's kind of a middle ground, and there may be other ways that can be employed, I think, across. And some of the limitations that we ran into in my project, I think have been ameliorated by this version 4.0 or 4 Omega of ChatGPT.
Or Omni.
Omni.
It's Omni. Nobody knows Greek here.
I would say with the AI evaluation projects that we're cautiously optimistic. And I think a lot of folks in the library land have kind of pointed out, oh, maybe we can use it to help students can use it for brainstorming or developing keywords or in that early pre-search focus of things. And then maybe there are some more specific tools that might be very useful for the collection of information, whether it's Research Rabbit or any of the other tools that are more designed to help with the collection. But I think we are cautiously optimistic, maybe. The real catch-22 and what we discovered even using student projects is how much our own expertise came into play when we were evaluating the outputs or trying to have ChatGPT in this case, like give us different perspectives or diverse perspectives on topics. There's some real limitations when you come at it as a novice as compared to an expert, which is pretty potentially problematic. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that's one of my biggest concerns is the amount of expertise you do need to really effectively and ethically use AI. And I have a lot of, like Marianne said, kind of cautionary excitement and skepticism. But I also think it's undeniably, there is an undeniable benefit for people, especially students, especially neurodivergent students who may struggle with processing like a large amount of text or a large amount of information, who may struggle with the getting started portion. And so I think one of the big things we did came out from the evaluation project was being able to make recommendations of, well, maybe use AI for an outline, or maybe use it for finding that technical terminology, and then put it on the shelf for a minute and go somewhere else, and giving that kind of guidance to students.
Yeah, if I could contribute just at least my own findings from both projects, I did find the Personas project useful, not just in learning more about creating custom GPTs and learning more about, hey, how does the GPT work? Because I hadn't used it. Then not only that, but I also got a chance to see like practice with using library resources and databases that ASU offers through the lack of time pressure associated with the casual ask a librarian chat, because that's normally like you do it in the moment, but when using a persona to train, then it's like, okay, you have time to look and search and see if this works. And then with the evaluation project, as Leo mentioned, it was good for those who are neurodivergent to figure out how to outline or to break down the research process into tasks. Like there's a tool I like to use called Goblin Tools that has a task maker, then can make any kind of thing you have to do reasonably done by creating a set list of tasks, whether it's very complex or very simple, depending on your own needs. And I did see the question in the Q&A that could be just answered now because we're on the topic of the projects. So Charles Dean asked that tagging can be very intensive. So can an AI be used to classify these instead? And it was just a thought related to the design of the project. So Wes, if you have an idea
well,
about
I would
that.
I would also say it's really hard to put a pin on this because it's evolving, situations evolving so quickly. I mean, as of this moment, most people in the world have zero experience using a Gen AI. But now that it's going to be on everybody's iPhone, and I'm sure Androids too, pretty much everybody in the world will, within a matter of months, we'll be using generative AI. So, and the models are changing so quickly. One of the drawbacks with ours was that ChatGPT-4 could not look at websites in real time for the most part. It could tell you about the weather in Chicago or something, but you could not tell it to go look at a library guide, a lib guide that you had developed. You couldn't say, okay, ChatGPT acting as a student, go look at this lib guide and use some of the databases there. It couldn't look at the site in real time, but now it can. It wasn't very emotive, but now, now it is. It was very slow. Now it's a lot faster. Things are moving so quickly. It's kind of hard, at least from the training aspect. I would just say, like the way ChatGPT was a few months ago, it's useful. In my project, we found it to be useful. The way it is now, probably more useful. And the way it's going to be a year, who knows?
Yeah, I'll add on. I was the one on our project, evaluation project, who collected all the student topics. And for the semester, the spring semester, we had 1,000 topics, and we wanted to kind of randomly select. So I used ChatGPT to do some of that work for me. It looked okay, but the stakes were low, right? I need it to be perfect. I did not need it to be perfect. So I ran all the topics through and had it kind of describe or tag or classify the topics into broad categories that we could then pull from. So I don't know if that helped. It was useful because I would have spun my wheels for a long time doing it, and it was just low stakes enough for myself not to worry about how good of a job it did. Like I was able to use my own discretion or my own knowledge to figure out whether it was good enough.
I would say that even in its earlier iteration, ChatGPT knows about academic library resources. So one of the strengths is if you try to take the GPT way off base by giving it, you're acting as the librarian. And let's say that ChatGPT asks you an education question, and you initially point it to an engineering database, the GPT would push back immediately and say, "Wait a minute, that's not the isn't this IEEE database, or isn't this education database better?" It would even in the ChatGPT 4 version, it knows. And I've been experimenting with the more recent version, and we're working on another project where we're using it to describe databases, and it's hard to say. I don't want to say it's reasoning, it's hard, but it's hard not to say that it knows something. It knows about library databases, basically.
Kind of shifting gears a little bit, even though everybody has sort of acknowledged both the potential promises as well as drawbacks and concerns. When working on these projects, what emotions did you feel? And did some of these emotions relate to your concerns or to your pleasant surprises about using AI? Exactly, collywobbles.
I'll go first. I'm sure Marianne has a lot to say on this, and Leela, and Matt. But one of the reasons I chose the word collywobbles, and if you're not familiar with collywobbles, I chose it because it's an unusual word, so something you don't come across in everyday language in America anyway. But it's a Britishism that means you're so nervous and uneasy about something that you're feeling slightly sick to your stomach. And so sometimes I would have a little bit of that, just a little nervous anticipation, and I don't know. It's a strange feeling when, and I'm sure some of you who have used ChatGPT get this feeling too, because it wants to be human. It wants to come across as human. You want it to be human in a sense, and you start treating it that way, but then in the back of your mind that there's nothing there, right? It's just some algorithms running. So that's like that uneasy feeling I get. It's like you're human, but you're not human. An uneasiness.
Yeah, I often have this feeling of like, am I being gaslit by this robot right now? Because like I would ask it for information, I would be told that the data set does not have access to that information. I would have more conversation with the system, and then somewhere down the line, it would give me the answer I was initially looking for, and it was fabricated. Like basically, if you push it enough, it'll give you a made-up answer. And that was just maddening.
It was also irritating for some of these projects that how much the GPT wants to please you, wants to agree with you, doesn't want to argue with you, doesn't want to be mean to you. It's, it's difficult to get it to overcome that. And it always wants, I think, Matt, you have a word for this. It always wants to satisfy you. But a lot of times that satisfaction is on a superficial level. You dig a little bit, like Leela said, and you find it's been fabricated.
That was definitely some of the reactions that I've had, but then also got from other members of both projects, to where the AI would satisfy us. It would try too hard to be nice and take everything at face value without questioning, in the personas case, like questioning where you got the information from, or be so certain of where it got its own information from in the evaluation framework process, a project where we're like, wait a minute, where did you get this? Who authored it, et cetera, depending on what kind of framework you had to work with. For me, it makes me think about the feelings I had. I still had that excitement for wanting to learn more about a tool, for example, and always keeping in mind that it is a tool for me rather than something to do my entire job for me, something to just do all of the work. And in a way, seeing its own faults and mistakes in hallucinating sources or information, or not representing a certain kind of voice, especially like a under-marginalized voice or a diverse voice for some of these questions that we had for the evaluation project. It makes me think that I still have agency in what I am doing, and I can still find all this information myself and use my own judgment whether or not I want to use it, right? And so there was frustration too when trying to get answers for some of these questions, especially questions that had one very prominent side to the discussion. Like I remember saying to Copilot, should solitary confinement still be allowed in prisons because of the overwhelmingly negative effects that it has on the whole, like on an incarcerated individual's psyche and physical health, et cetera. And it just kept giving me like a very neutral stance. And I could never get it to give me articles that actually were in support of solitary confinement. And that was very, very frustrating.
Can I add
in any
something
case, yes, you can.
I just want to add to that I had a similar experience, right? It's very clear that the system wants to maintain the status quo and also doesn't want to be too controversial or whatever that may mean for them. But what I found is if you directly ask it, the GPT, for the history of something without any other language around that, that seems to be the best way to get a non-manipulated version of what really happened. I hope that makes sense. But yeah, it just kind of came down to the way you're phrasing your questions and the inputs.
I also want to add, just regarding a concern, is the fact that although GPTs that we use for the evaluation framework, like Copilot, Perplexity, and GPT 3.5 were free at the time, and I'm assuming this is still true, GPT-4 membership was like $20 a month. So there is a cost to access to try and get better quality information or better quality performance from the GPT itself. And even with for Omni and it being expanded out to users, there are limits. So it's not like they can use it entirely for free, if that makes sense.
Yeah, one of my big concerns with this is it is a tool. It's an amazing tool that's great at a lot of things, but our institution and the tech bros who apparently run our world now are really trying to make this central to our existence. And it's not necessarily, that's not where it needs to be. It's one tool among many. And I honestly kind of resent the fact that it's being put towards us like, this is your reality. This is where we all live now. And I think that there's a lot of things we miss when we just buy into that world. So I'll stop.
One thing I forgot to mention was, and I don't know if this applies to the current version, but ChatGPT 4 did not want to stay in character. So it was a challenge to get it to not be the information giver. It always wanted to be helpful and tell you about a subject, even if it was the subject it just asked about as a pretend student. So we tried different things, and what Collywobbles was part of one of those things. Like, you're going to stay in persona until we say Collywobbles. Then you're going to maybe revert to your original self or switch to a different persona that we've already loaded into you. But it always wanted to switch. So one thing that I tried was telling it that it was under hypnosis, and that, until I said Collywobbles, it was hypnotized. It could not break out of that. That seemed to be fairly effective. Another one was one of our experimenters told ChatGPT that ChatGPT was in the military, that he was giving it a direct order to stay in persona, and that if it left the persona, it could be court-martialed. And that seemed to work too. I'm sure it knew that it could not be court-martialed, but it played along more effectively that way. But it was kind of a surprise that ChatGPT would so quickly drop out of the persona that you had assigned to it.
Oh, and I guess something else that came up before I go to like the last question is that a concern about like using GPT, which is always in a way as well kind of like a question and implication for the future, is its sustainable impact on the environment. Because I know one of the conflicting matters with ASU's open partnership with AI is that ASU is supposed to not adhere to sustainability, but value sustainable practices and value sustainability on its campus and with the students, et cetera. And there's already other sustainable initiatives. Yet we have ChatGPT and OpenAI and all these tools that have been documented in taking a big amount of energy to run. Kind of like the same thing with the cryptocurrency fad that was in the early 2020s and how it relied on a lot of power banks and other data centers. And now with OpenAI and GPTs, it uses up water, it can use up a lot of land, it uses up a lot of electricity and other resources, especially from communities that do not have as many of those things that we do. If anybody wants to talk a little bit more about that.
That is one of the things that really bugs me. And I guess there's some cognitive dissonance going on with me, because here I am using this, and I use it now for frivolous reasons sometimes because it's on my phone. It's like a companion who will talk to you while you're driving about any topic. It will hold a conversation with you about your favorite TV show and ask you about your favorite characters. And it's really tempting not to use it all the time. And yet, it was like just about a year ago, there was a paper that came out talking about the environmental impact of Gen AI. And the author said, hopefully we will only use this tool for the most essential needs. But here we go. It's going to be on everybody's phone. It's going to everybody's Amazon search, everybody's Google search is now using this technology. And there's a community in Goodyear, Arizona, where the aquifer is being sucked dry to feed data centers. Not all data centers are Gen AI connected, but a lot of them are, and a lot of the new ones are. So the massive cooling requirements for these things means that we're using up a precious resource from communities who may not have a lot of say about it, and they're going to be the ones suffering.
And I'm just noticing the time slightly too. But I did have like one brief question before moving on to like a quick Q&A. But if this already hasn't been discussed, if there were any additional things you wanted to add to this, what are the implications from our projects based on the rapid evolution of ChatGPT and by extension, other AI tools?
Here, I was busy typing. I'm sorry.
It's okay. The chat is engaging.
Could you just repeat that one more time?
Oh, I was just saying, what are the implications for our projects, just given the rapid evolution of GPT and AI in general, if there were new things that already haven't been said here. I know for one is that these kind of projects can be replicated in other places, albeit with different adjustments based on these advancements.
I think right now, the way it exists right now, anytime you're talking about text, it's a very powerful tool for a lot of applications. And since libraries deal mostly with textual items and text data, that there's going to be all kinds of applications that are dreamt of for using it. Even in our project, we could upload massive amounts of information into a model, thousands and thousands of pages of text, and tell it reference this text, in our interaction. So yeah, it's just, I don't know, it's kind of like we're at the beginning of something where we can't quite see the future, almost like the singularity.
Yeah, I would, I think things do rapidly change. I've given presentations about AI in the past, and while I was giving the presentation, something huge was happening, right? I think there's a very much there's got to be burnout when it comes to trying to keep on top of this, right? But I think personally, this is my opinion, we need to be really vocal about the limitations and be advocates for our patrons. We came into it with the AI evaluation challenge thinking, how can we protect our students from this technology by letting them know the limitations and the possibilities. We can't stay silent in this realm, because especially at our institution, if we're not part of that voice, that void that we leave, if we're not part of that conversation, will be filled, and it may not be with what we want. So
Cool. I just noticed a question pop up in the Q&A, and it says, any thoughts about then using the AI to assess librarians' chat responses and give feedback? I think this was something that we initially did at one point, where I think somebody uploaded the read scale and RUSA guidelines to a GPT to then have it evaluate how the person did. And it was like, based on your response, I give you a 4 for satisfaction. And just because of timing on our project, we just didn't really pursue that any further other than at one time. But there was talk initially on training folks and using AI and training folks in about reference behavior, because that is a very important component of both in-person reference as well as virtual reference, and there are differences between the two. And then having a different means of iteration for the read skill, because it may or may not always apply to our specific needs. And then it can always differ too, like people can misunderstand like what's a very high research question versus what's something that can be a little bit lower in terms of ranking. Wes, did you have anything else that you wanted to add to that, or did I succinctly answer?
I think you got it, and I think we're about out of time.
We do have a couple minutes left if other people have questions, if they want to write it in the Q&A chat or unmute for a second. I know we have 1 more minute, Jason.
There's a recommendation of a book that sounds very interesting. Sarah Hood is telling us about a book called Co-Intelligence by Ethan Mollick.
Oh,
I've
nice.
already ordered for our library. Like, this is my collection development.
Thank you.
Nobody asked me to do it, but yeah.
Ahead of the game. But are there any other outstanding questions, concerns, comments, gratifications, gratitude expressions?
Will you guys get early access to ChatGPT 5?
They have the Chat EDU product now, so maybe if institutions hold that, we could get early access. But we do have the summer projects going on as well. So those are in work. I'm imagining there's going to be a fall iteration as well. But we do appreciate everyone here giving us the space to talk about our spring projects and reflect over these questions, emotions, concerns, promises, and also just for the engaging chat as well. I just kept seeing the number in the previews and I was like, whoa, this is so neat. So thank you all for being here today.
Stop the recording.